Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, episode 172. On this episode of the podcast, Jenn interviews Dr. Russell Kennedy on anxiety in the workplace. Is it or is it not what we think it is? Yes, it is. Wait, no. No, it isn't. Oh no, I should know the answer to this. Is this going to be on my performance review?
You're listening to the Careers by Jenn podcast with me, Jenn Swanson, the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Hey there, thanks for tuning in today. Today I want to talk about anxiety. Anxiety is pretty common. I know I suffer from it from time to time, and I have family members who do, and chances are you do too. And the fact that we all have anxiety at work and at home is true, but the question is, what can we do about it? How can we manage it or do something that will make it more manageable? And so my guest today is going to help alleviate some of our anxiety about anxiety by offering real solid ways to deal with it. So you'll want to stick around. Dr. Russ Kennedy is a medical doctor, a neuroscientist, a yoga and meditation teacher, and yes, even a stand-up comedian. He has toured with the Wyatts comedy chain, and he knows what anxiety in the workplace looks like. He once had to do a comedy show in the small town of Cranbrook, British Columbia, here in Canada, where most of the crowd had just come from a funeral. So he's pretty familiar with stress and anxiety in the workplace. And of course, he was also no stranger to stress in his day job as a medical doctor. Dr. Russ has a website with tons of information on it, and we'll share that with you at the end of the show. And he has also just created a YouTube channel called The Anxiety MD, where he shares a lot of his tools and advice on what to do when you are dealing with anxiety. So we will get to my conversation with Dr. Russell Kennedy, The Anxiety MD, right after this.
Are you procrastinating? Do you want to start a job search but aren't quite sure where to begin? Is it all just a little overwhelming? At Careers by Jenn, we have a 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge to help you get unstuck and move toward finding your dream job. Every day for 5 days, you'll receive an email to your inbox that asks you to complete one task. Every task you complete moves you closer toward your goal. The best part about this challenge is that it's absolutely free. Come over to careersbyjenn.com and you'll see the 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the image of Jenn, sign up with your email address, and you'll be 5 days closer to reaching your goal. Why wait when you can get busy? Visit careersbyjenn.com after this podcast.
So thanks for tuning in, everyone. This is Jenn Swanson with the Careers by Jenn podcast and my conversation with Dr. Russell Kennedy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's a topic that is, I think, on the forefront of many people's minds these days, anxiety. And before we jump into exactly what that is, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came to be doing the work that you're doing now.
Well, who I am, I've always been a bit of a misfit, I think. I started med school late. I don't think I started med school until I was about 26. I've always been a bit of a late bloomer, and then I became a stand-up comedian for about 10 years and toured with the Wyatts comedy chain here in Canada. And the comedians would look at me kind of strange because what's this doctor doing stand-up comedy? And then the doctors would look at me like, why are you doing this? Like, so I've always been a bit of a misfit. And then I became a yoga teacher about 2007. And it's funny, one of your guests I just listened to, Annalisa Kapp, she and I were in the exact same yoga teacher training 10 years ago in Vancouver with Shakti Mihi. So, so there's the and I have a degree in neuroscience. So there's the neuroscientist, doctor, the yoga teacher. I spent some time in India for a while, kind of really examining my own mind. And I've dealt with anxiety, quite severe anxiety for many, many years. And I've done things like ayahuasca, LSD, MDMA, not to get high or anything like that, just to kind of get on the other side of my anxious mind, because I really noticed that, anxious people just overthink everything. And I think what happened with me is my mind and my body became disconnected. So they weren't able to regulate each other anymore. So my mind went out of control with these obsessive thoughts, and then my body went out of control with this excessive sympathetic autonomic discharge, where I would go into sympathetic overdrive. So they weren't ever able to connect to each other. And now, with my yoga and with different other things that I like to talk about how I got better and started changing it into a new career myself, which is to become a speaker, anxiety expert. I've created a course for people with anxiety, and just changing from leaving medicine, because that was one of those fields where, you make a good income, you have nice status. There's a lot of perks that go along with being a doctor. But, my mind and my body just kept telling me this is just not where you should be. And I burned out 5 years before I finally left. So that's the short version.
Sounds like a lot of transition for you.
There was. I think it's been one big, for everyone, life is one big solid transition. But it's just making that leap and deciding to get away from the anxiety and not being a victim so much. I think that's a lot of what anxiety does to us. It turns us into these vulnerable kind of victims. And then when you're vulnerable and when you're feeling like a victim, it's very hard to step forward and make a new change. And I think it really behooves you to develop a new mindset and decide and make a conscious intention that you're not going to be a victim anymore. You're not going to be a victim of these racing thoughts, because the thoughts, especially when you're in alarm, are not going to help you. They're just going to dig you deeper into a hole. And that reminds me of a story that one of my patients told me. He was around mid-40s, I guess, lost his wife to cancer, and came into me and he said, "Dr. Kennedy, I'm so anxious. I'm just so anxious and depressed. I've got to dig myself out of this hole." And I said, "Well, you can't dig yourself out of a hole, dude." I don't know if I said dude. But you can't dig yourself out of a hole. When you're in a hole, you have to stop digging. And I draw thoughts as digging. So when you're in thought, you are digging. You are digging yourself deeper into a hole, although your thoughts will tell you that the thoughts are the way to go. But it's like drinking seawater. No matter how much seawater you drink, you get more and more dehydrated. And that's what it's like when you overthink things. And it's realizing that you're overthinking things. And I think that is the key to understanding anxiety, is realizing when you're overthinking and when you can just change your focus from thinking into sensation, into feeling, because then you start seeing the other world. But if you just get trapped in your head, which a lot of us with anxiety and stress do, we never see the other side. We never actually see the ability to calm ourselves down from a mind-body standpoint.
So one of the things that, and maybe I'm imagining this, but one of the things that I wonder about is the prevalence of anxiety in society now. Has that increased? And what is it? What is anxiety that it is so pervasive, or so it seems to me?
Well, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who's one of my real, idols and influences, he says that all anxiety is separation anxiety. And I think as a country, especially here in North America, but around the world, we are becoming more separate from each other. I was listening to Brene Brown's latest book, Braving the Wilderness. And in that book, the short version of it is, we have never lived closer to people who are more alike than us in political beliefs, activity levels, all that kind of thing, and been more separate from each other. And the more separate we are, the more sitting ducks we are for anxiety. And that separation goes from being separated from other people, as well as being separated from ourselves. The amount of self-judgment that we have, what I call jabs, the way we jab ourselves, JABS, is, we self-judge. So that's the judgment. And when we do that, we alienate from ourselves. And when we alienate from ourselves, we start to blame, because it creates a lot of negative energy. And then if we blame ourselves, that turns into shame. So this whole cycle just repeats itself over and over again. And we never get out of it unless we can stand back and see. It's like the old philosophical saying that you are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes your thoughts. And for me, that was an absolutely huge revelation, because I believed up until that point that I was my thoughts. I believed that if I left my job, I'd be stranded. No one would love me anymore. I would lose my connection to the other doctors. I would lose my connection to my family because they expect me to be a doctor as well. And none of that was even close to being accurate. In fact, I started living a lot better and a lot more healthy when I finally left medicine.
And because you were being more authentic to who you were, maybe. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's so hard, getting back to your original question, to be authentic these days requires a fair amount of courage to be vulnerable. And I bring Brene Brown up with this too, because if you're not vulnerable, you're not authentic. And if you're not vulnerable, you don't experience joy either. They come as a package deal. Joy and authenticity come as a package deal. So if we're constantly worried about being judged, which in our society with television, everything is judgment, judgment, judgment. And I'm going to diverge a little bit here because, with comedians, as a comedian, you go through your life looking for things you can judge because a lot of that is funny. And I would look at young comics coming up and see them as kind of happy-go-lucky people initially. And over the course of 5 or 10 years, they become really strong comedians, but really unhappy people. So that thing about judgment, and I think that's what's going through our whole society right now. And now when we have, President Trump in the United States, there's so much judgment involved in him as a president. And we're getting caught up in the judgment rather than actually trying to do something about it. So this judgment has created this greater and greater separation between us as people and within ourselves, which is probably the most dangerous. So if all separation is all anxiety is separation anxiety, when you separate from yourself and you judge yourself, where do you think that's going to go? And it becomes, and mindfulness comes in here. I am a huge fan of mindfulness in general, but I really feel like the catchphrase mindfulness is being really overused because, sometimes we have to deal with our past. Sometimes we can't just say, okay, let's just live in the moment. Sometimes you actually do have to just live in the moment. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're panicked, then you have to say, am I safe in this moment? And if you're safe in that moment, then you're safe. But in general, we get into this environment of just so much judgment of ourselves and each other. And in that point, we're afraid to be vulnerable. When we're afraid to be vulnerable, we can't connect anymore. We get higher anxiety, which makes us withdraw more. And it's just, that's the cycle that we're in now. And, the horrible thing is that we can't really trust each other anymore. Like I could say, hey, fasting is great for you. Fasting 12 hours, 3 days a week is amazing. And there'd be just another prominent expert that would say, look, you must eat 4 meals a day on this schedule because your pancreas gets used to it, your liver gets used to it. Who do you believe? Like who? Yeah. That's what we can't believe each other anymore. And there's a great book. Oh God, what was it called? It'll come to me in a minute, about the country of Moldova, which is apparently the most unhappy country in the world because nobody trusts each other there. No one will see a doctor there who looks under the age of 35 because they assume that they have purchased their medical degree. And I want to remember the name of that book because I really loved that book. It was a really great book. And but that's, I think that's where we're going these days.
Is that why anxiety is so hard to treat or so hard to live with, it seems like?
I think anxiety is so hard to treat because we're treating the wrong thing. We worship mental ability in our society. But unfortunately, when we overthink things, we lose that connection with our body. I think anxiety is not really anxiety. I think anxiety is really an alarm that's in our body. And what I believe happens typically, this is not true for everybody, but typically when we're younger, we experience a vulnerability that's too much to bear. And that energy goes up into our mind, and it's too much for the mind to bear. So that energy gets spilled over into the body and held in the body as alarm because the mind can't handle it. And then alarm charges up the mind to create anxious thoughts because, the anxiety in the body, the alarm in the body is not going to create nice, pleasant kitties, cookies, and picnics images. And then those images just reinforce the alarm, and we get caught in this anxiety alarm cycle. And then if we just treat the anxious thoughts with cognitive behavior therapy and typical talk therapy, we're missing this whole wave of what really causes anxiety in my mind, which is this alarm that's stored in our body, this unresolved trauma that's stored in our body. That's what's feeding the alarm. And we are under the misguided impression that we can recalibrate that old unresolved trauma by talking about it. And what we have to do, in my opinion, is reconnect with the body. And I'm not a huge yoga advocate, even though I am a yoga advocate. I love yoga. But I think it gets looked at as kind of woo-woo and flaky. But anything that joins your mind and your body together, Qigong I love, yoga I love, breathing techniques. When you're anxious, you're not breathing. The anxiety is breathing you. So even changing the pattern that you breathe at, even if you hold your breath, which a lot of people would say, well, you don't want to do that in anxiety because that's just going to make you feel even more anxious. What it actually does is it gives you a sense of control over your breath because the anxiety is breathing you. You are not in control. So if you break that cycle, you have a chance of opening up that cycle at that area and going, okay, now I'll decide to change my breathing pattern to something that's more helpful to me. And just be on guard because the anxiety will always try and suck you back in to that old breathing pattern that supports it, rather than you being able to support yourself by deciding, okay, I'm going to focus on my breath here. I'm going to focus on the sensation of breath rather than the thoughts, even though the thoughts are going to hijack. They're going to try and peck at you and try and take over. And it's up to you, as that we have these huge prefrontal cortices, these huge front parts of our brain that are very powerful, but they're only powerful if we use them in the right way. So if we use them to recognize when we're overthinking, and can I move into sensation? I'm not saying stop thoughts because that almost is more anxiety creating than anything else. But I'm saying stop and move into sensation. Give your mind something productive to do and leave the thoughts for a while. And thinking is fine. I'm not anti-thinking. I'm only anti-thinking when you're in alarm. Because when you're in alarm, you lose the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. You lose the ability to have that rational part of your brain to go, hey, this thought you're having, this is really irrational. You're losing contact with reality. And then you get into survival brain and all this future-based crap comes up, but you don't have the front part of your brain to help you kind of say, hey, this isn't real. This isn't real anymore. So those thoughts actually create more anxiety because they seem more real, because the part of our brain that says, hey, this isn't really happening is offline.
I want to ask you about alarm in a second, but before that, I want to ask you, is there ever a time when anxiety is useful?
That's a good question. Yeah, before I go on stage as a comedian, if I didn't feel nervous, I knew there was a problem. I probably knew it wasn't going to be a great show or I would have to fight it. So there's a difference between anticipation anxiety and generalized anxiety. And I think the difference in anxiety is that if you're sucked into obsessive thinking, that's bad anxiety. But if you can use that energy as a focus of, okay, hey, I'm overthinking right now. How can I make the intention to move into my body and, breathe? And that's what everyone says before you do public speaking or whatever. Breathe, focus, feel your feet on the earth. Use that energy in a productive way rather than before you're going to go on stage or before you're going to do a talk, go, this could go really badly. Oh, they could hate me. Oh, that's bad anxiety. But anxiety that you use to say, hey, this is a message for me right now that I got to connect with my body, that would be good anxiety.
So going back to alarm, what is alarm? Is that like a panic attack? Is that what would you classify as alarm?
I'd say the simple version of alarm is just what we call sympathetic overdrive in medicine. We have the autonomic nervous system, which I kind of call the automatic nervous system of our body, which controls our heart rate and our blood pressure and our skin, sweating. And when we get into alarm, it's a part of that sympathetic fight or flight nervous system that's always on, that's switched on. And when we're in that, we go into survival mode, the part of our brain that involves survival, because as ancient people, that's what would happen. There'd be like, there's a sense of alarm, there's some danger. So we lose our ability to think. Like when you're being chased by a lion, you're not going to glance over at a tree and go, hey, that'd be a really good tree for a tree fort over there. I think that'd be really nice. We focus on life or death situations. And that's unfortunately how we're hardwired from 500,000 years ago. And that's what happens is we get into this alarm situation, which is just an excess of sympathetic fight or flight nervous system that isn't allowed to release. And things that release alarm are mind-body connection, are feeling joy. I had this thing that I mentioned sometimes in my course about sometimes when I would feel really happy, I would immediately have to think of something that brought me down again, because it was not safe when I was growing up. It was not safe to be happy for any length of time. My father was severely mentally ill, so I never knew when he would go psychotic. Now, he was never abusive or anything like that, but as a 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, to see your father lose complete touch with reality is pretty stressful and pretty alarming. So I learned over the course of time that what I need to do with the alarm is I need to just sort of make friends with it. And to get a little bit woo-woo and a little bit flaky, I think that sense of alarm is our younger selves, the self in us that felt somehow immobilized. And Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a psychiatrist out of Boston, talks about this. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's the same thing. It's like the alarm in the body holds this energy, and we need to release that energy before the anxious thoughts will go away. The anxious thoughts are just the effect. And what I was saying earlier about how we put our intellect on a platter and we say, this is what we should strive for. So we think we should be able to fix the anxious mind with the anxious mind, and that doesn't work. So what we need to do is we need to fix the anxious mind by going into the body and fixing the body. Now, there's nothing wrong with cognitive behavior therapy or psychotherapy or anything like that. The thing that I find, the issue that I have with it is that they virtually ignore the body in the healing of the mind. And it's the alarm that causes the issue. If you get rid of the alarm, the anxious thoughts don't have any fuel, so you don't have anxious thoughts anymore. But if you just work on the anxious thoughts, the underlying cause, which is the alarm in the body, is still there. And you have to get that alarm in the body at a feeling-based level. Either, Qigong, yoga, breathing. There's a couple of things in my course that I talk about how to get in touch with that alarm. And some people actually even talk to that alarm like it was their 11, 12, 13-year-old who had an alcoholic parent or whatever, and said, hey, we're not there anymore. Because that's one part of the brain, the amygdala, it doesn't know time. So whenever you experience a trauma, that trauma in the amygdala's mind is still active. So when you recall those old traumas, they don't feel like they're coming from the past. They feel like they're happening now. So the only way of getting a hold of those old traumas is to deal with the alarm first. And then you can start looking at the mind. Then you can start looking at the anxious thoughts and deconstructing them a little bit. Now, I'm doing a lot of talking here, so I should let you.
No, it's quite all right. It's fascinating. I had multiple things I wanted to ask all at once there. I took both levels of training in NLP. Yeah. And some of that comes to mind when you're talking about remembering to go into your body and not just the mind. And I can't remember exactly what exercise it was that I learned during my training, but it was something about, touching your feet on the floor at some point, just to remember that you are in your body and that whatever state you're being put into is not current. And also when I did experience panic attacks in the midst of a toxic work environment, and one of the things a colleague of mine said to do was when I felt like I couldn't breathe was to take a drink of water, because your body knows that you can still swallow, and if you can still swallow, you can still breathe. And I thought, isn't that interesting?
Well, what's interesting about that from a medical point of view is that you are actually activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. We have the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, and the sympathetic, which is fight or flight. So that's why people smoke cigarettes. That's why they chew gum, because it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which fights that sense of alarm that's in the body. And it's interesting you talk about panic attacks. One of the things that I talk about panic attacks is that the resistance is what causes most of the panic attacks. So when people come up to me and they say, well, they used to say in my practice, they would say, I get these really bad panic attacks. What do I do about them? And I'd say, well, the first thing you do is you put your feet flat on the floor. You feel your feet as best you can. And then the next thing you do is say, bring it on. Okay, panic attack, let's go. If you're gonna give me a panic attack, give me the best damn panic attack I have ever had. Because what happens in panic attacks is we're on the bus or in the grocery store or whatever, and we think, oh my God, you get that feeling, that initial feeling, like I'm gonna have because I've had them too. And it's like, oh, I can't have a panic attack here. I might pass out. And you hold it back and hold it back and hold it back. And what do you think is going to happen when you hold back a dam over and over and over for 35 to 40 seconds? It's finally going to blast. And when it goes, it's going to take you with it. So if you can stop the resistance to the panic attack and in fact, stop being a victim and say, okay, panic, let's go, bring it on. I'm not saying this cures it or makes it like, oh, this is so much better. But it at least A, puts you in control, and B, usually it sort of nullifies the panic attack, or at least you get a little bit of a wave, but it's not nearly the same. And what I say about panic attacks now is I kind of enjoy the rush because I know what it is, right? I know it's just a flush of my sympathetic nervous system that's gone up to my brain. And the funny thing about panic attacks is when people first start having them, they don't know what they are. So the first thing they have is like, I had this weird feeling when I was coming home from work today. Like I felt a little dizzy and lightheaded. And then they get another one 2 or 3 days later. And it's like, well, this is strange. I had this before. They're not particularly alarmed though. But this is what happens. Then it goes up to the mind and the mind goes, what if you're going to pass out? What if you're having a heart attack? What if this is a stroke? Then you get the whole cycle. Then you get the alarm in the body and the anxiety of the mind, and they link together. And when they link together, they are a monstrous force. So typically it's the thoughts and it's the resistance that really fuels the panic attack. So if you can just put your feet flat on the floor, feel your feet and welcome it, I bet a lot of the panic attacks will go away. Because a lot of what happens in anxiety is we get this mind-body disconnect, as I mentioned earlier. And this mind-body disconnect makes us not feel when we're hungry, not feel even when we have to go to the bathroom until it's so we lose this touch with our body and we completely rely on our head, especially intelligent people. Because what happens with intelligent people is they think, well, I'll rely on my intellect, and then they achieve all these things. Like they become a yoga teacher and a medical doctor and a neuroscientist and all these sort of things. And then they notice their anxiety isn't a whole lot better. In fact, it's a little bit worse because now you've separated fully from your body and you've gone completely into your head, but you're treated in a way to thinking, this is the way to do it. Man, I've accomplished all these things. I should just stay in my head. Now, I don't think we think that consciously, but that just creates even more tendency to stay in your head. And then you lose even more of your body. And when you lose your body, there's nothing left to regulate your mind. So if you lose your body, you're really not going to get better from anxiety. And that's what I mean about the alarm, is treating the alarm in the body first, and then going after the anxious thoughts.
So to get into the body, does exercise help? I mean, you talk about yoga. Is that like to add that practice into your life to alleviate some of this? Or is it in the moment that you need to get into your body? Or both?
It's both. It really is. So when if you're having a panic attack or you're having anxiety at work, and there's something called box breathing that I recommend to people. And you basically make a box with your finger. And I'm drawing it. You can see it right now, but the people in the audience can't see it. But you put your finger in front of you, and as you inhale, you raise your finger up about 6 to 8 inches or whatever. And then you hold your breath, and then you draw your finger across to make the top of the box, but you hold your breath while you do that. And then when you reach the top of the box, then you exhale by drawing down to make the far side of the box, hold your breath, and then come right back to your original starting point, and then start all over again. And it does two things. It creates something for your mind to do that isn't thinking, for one. And it also starts taking control of your breathing. And when you can take control of your breathing, then you get your prefrontal cortex back online. You get out of survival brain, which is the lowest part of your brain as it enters the spinal cord, back into your prefrontal cortex again. You can think a little clearer, and then you just keep doing that. And after a while, you start to learn early, okay, I'll do some box breathing here for 5 or 10 minutes. Or even if you do it for 2 minutes, it's going to make a difference. And that's in the short term. In the longer term, yeah, absolutely a yoga practice or a qigong practice or anything that matches your mind with your body is really going to help you. But here's the thing. A lot of people will resist doing these things because anxiety, and here's a huge point, anxiety is a coping strategy that we develop typically as children, right? So there's going to be a big resistance to letting go of anxiety. We actually see anxiety at the unconscious level as protective. So when I try and teach you how to, I hate using this term, but get rid of anxiety, part of your unconscious thinks I'm teaching you how to get rid of an old friend that was protective, because all these worries, warnings, what ifs, worst case scenarios are there to protect you. Your anxiety is not there to hurt you. It is fundamentally there to protect you. So if I show you ways to get away from that, and that's why we need patience, and that's why people resist getting better from anxiety, and that's why it's so hard to treat, because deep down in our unconscious, when this started, when we're 6, 10, 14, whatever years old, we thought that this was helping us. So that's my biggest fight in helping people with anxiety, is just persevering, is, maybe just do 30 seconds to a minute of box breathing. Just do box breathing when you're not even anxious. Just practice it, just so that you get an idea that you can control your breathing. You can control something in your environment, because a lot of anxiety is feeling like you're completely out of control.
Can you ever get rid of it?
I don't know if you ever get rid of it. Like, I think what happens is that you recognize the signs of it coming on earlier. And then you can adopt these strategies that I teach in my course and I sort of have on my website, and I'm starting a YouTube channel soon. You can start recognizing it early so that it becomes less of a problem in your life. And as soon as you feel like you have some element of control over your anxiety, because people can handle so much if they know it's going to end. The worst part of anxiety for me, when I was in it and I had lost 30 pounds and I couldn't eat, and there was part of me that just didn't want to live anymore, was, when is this going to end? Like, when is this going to go? And that's the part that really caused a lot of the problem. So if you, A, start doing something that you can see helps, and then B, start knowing that you have some control over this issue rather than it completely running your life, then you can start. Like, I still have it. Like, I still wake up with it sometimes, and, I'll do a little bit of yoga or qigong or whatever. I'll try and laugh. That's a big thing too. Tears are amazing. Tears, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, developmental psychologist out of Vancouver, is huge on tears, because a lot of this unresolved stuff that creates our alarm in our system only gets released with either a lot of laughter, which is why I believe laughter yoga is really helpful, although a lot of people can't bring themselves to do it. I have a hard time. It just feels weird to me.
It does feel weird.
It does feel odd, but it's one of these things where you learn to release the alarm in your system, because you can do all the anxious thought work that you want, but unless you deal with that alarm that's in the body, you're always going to deal with anxiety to some extent. And it's learning how to recognize it early. And, the analogy that I draw is, if you're piloting a 747 and you're going 500 knots in an hour, and you can see a storm an hour away, when are you going to turn? And what most people do is they worry. It's like, is this a storm? Is it going to be a big storm? Is it going to be a thunderstorm? Is it going to be and then, they've wasted 25, 35 minutes. Now they're in it. Now there's no way of getting out. But if you see the storm 500 miles away and you've got an hour and you go, oh, I've been here before. I know what this storm feels like. If I start doing some box breathing, or if I start feeling my body, if I start just taking control of my breath, then I get a chance to turn away. Now, you may still hit the edge of the storm, but it's not nearly as bad as what it used to be, which is going right down through the middle of it.
So if somebody is feeling like something like this is coming on at work, they're at work.
Yep.
They can't just stop and go do something.
No.
Is there something small they can do, or something effective that they can do, in the middle of it?
Yeah. Usually what I do is I get people to, well, this is a nice segue into this, is finding your alarm in your body. Because that's the source. It's not the anxious thoughts. The anxious thoughts are the tip of the iceberg. The problem is this huge 8/9 of the iceberg, which is the alarm. So usually alarm is felt around the heart area. Almost always it's in the midline, somewhere between your chin and your pelvis. And if you really tune in to when you're feeling anxious, like, where am I feeling this alarm? And a lot of people don't even until this will be new for a lot of people just listening to this on the podcast, is finding their alarm, because they've assumed that their anxiety is in their head. Now, you can find a place if you sit quietly and find that place. For me, it's just to the right of my solar plexus, and it's a sort of a fist. It's kind of a black color. It's sharp. And what I do is I put my hand just over that area of alarm and just connect with it and just mentally make the, and you can do that at your desk. You're not going to look like a weirdo if you put your hand on your alarm. Like, people could think, oh, maybe she's got heartburn or something like that. And just visualize connecting with that sense of alarm. Because what if that alarm is your younger child, and your younger child is asking you for some support and some connection at that point? And I know this sounds a little flaky, but stick with me. And if you put your hand on it and just say, I'm just connecting with it, then you at least have a chance to calm that sense of alarm and understand that you're connected to it. Because a big part of alarm is it feels completely disconnected. And what if you had a small child, say 5 or 6, come up to you, clearly alarmed? Would you push that kid away? Would you say, no, you go away. I can't deal with you right now. I'm going to, mommy's going to take some vodka or something like that to kind of push this kid away. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yeah.
What do you think that kid's going to do? Kid's going to freak out even more. So the more you can connect to your alarm, so A, see if you can connect to your alarm. Find your alarm first, see if you can connect to it on some level. And then B, just focus on your breath. Just focus. And a lot of people say, take a deep breath in. And I'm not a big fan of that. I think the first thing you should do is breathe all your air out.
Why is that?
Because when you take a full breath in, you have that sensation of really expanding your lungs and really feeling like you've taken a full breath in. Whereas if you, at an anxious state, say, take a deep breath in, it can actually be more anxiety provoking because your chest muscles have already shrunk down from the anxiety. So even your deep breath doesn't feel satisfying. But if you can breathe all the way out first, and I used to teach my asthma patients this too, if you can breathe all the way out first and then breathe in, psychologically, that does something to the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, which is the biggest nerve of the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system. And then you immediately start inducing that parasympathetic action, which will calm you down even more. And it will also give you a sense of control over the situation. Because again, anxiety is this feeling, this is never going to end. There is something in neuroscience we call the recency bias, which is how I feel now is going to be how I feel forever. So when you're in anxiety, your brain, your survival brain, you're not in your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, your survival brain is like, this is life-threatening. This is never going to end. And because you don't have your prefrontal cortex online anymore, you believe it. And then it gets worse and worse and worse. So if you have something that you can do, and you can do box breathing without actually putting your finger in front of you as well. And that's why I say practice it at home, like practice it in the car, provided you're not looking, backwards when you do it. But, practice it when you're not feeling anxious. Practice these things when you're not feeling anxious, because your brain will learn over the course of time, oh, this is what we do to calm down. So, we really have to get in touch with our body for sure. And I think that's the big thing, is finding that connection in your body. Put your hand over the alarm, control your breath so your anxiety isn't breathing you anymore. So you have this sense that, okay, this is going to end, and I do have some control over this situation.
Your energy is inspiring. And how are you feeling now about this work that you're doing? Are you feeling like you're in the right place?
Yeah, I do actually feel for the first time I'm really in the right place. I mean, I remember sitting on my bed looking out. I was about, I think, 12 when I look back at the places that we were at. I must have been about 12. And I was watching them put my father into the ambulance, taking him over to psychiatric intensive care. And it was like, one day, I'm going to make this mean something, because I just felt so trapped and so helpless, and there was nothing I could do about it. And as I got older and he got older, his schizophrenia got worse, and I just became more firm in my resolve. Was one of the reasons I became a doctor, was to help other people, because my main goal in all this is for people not to have to suffer like I did. I think the reason why I pursued neuroscience and medicine and that kind of thing was to be able to have this platform that I could examine my own mind. And that's one of the reasons why I did ayahuasca and LSD and MDMA, was not to experience those drugs, but to see exactly how much my mind was creating my mind, like minute after minute after minute after minute. And when I took ayahuasca, basically blew the back of my head off, I had no control. None. I had no control. So all I could do was watch my mind go crazy. And then I thought, who is in charge of this? Like, why is this? Why do I let myself do this? But what I was saying earlier is because I perceived that if I kept my mind going at 100 miles an hour, I was keeping myself safe, when I was actually doing the exact opposite. So my focus is to use my neuroscience training and my medical training, to some extent my yoga and stand-up comedy training, to really show people in common sense language what's happening in their brain, what they can do about it. So basically they don't have to suffer like I did. And for some reason, my dad's life made a lot of sense. And there was a lot of good that came out of it, because there was so much pain involved in it. And if I can turn that pain into something that helps other people, as, kind of altruistic as that sounds, that's really what I want to do. And that's why I'm loving what I'm doing now. It's taken me 3 years to create this course. I believe it's the greatest course in the world for anxiety. There's nothing else like it. Most courses that I see are either from professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and they come from one particular angle. Or they are people who are off the street, who basically say, this is my experience with anxiety, this is what I've done about it, this is what it's helped. So the unique thing about my course is that it comes from both sides. I'm the doctor and the patient. And I can tell you why this is happening. And I've always been very analytical. And the other thing that my patients used to tell me when I practiced medicine was I had this way of being able to explain things to people in ways they could understand it. I didn't use a lot of technical jargon. I mean, I use prefrontal cortex and that kind of stuff, but I don't use a lot of technical stuff. And I let them understand what's exactly going on in your brain. When you settle into anxiety, you're in survival brain. You lose your part of your brain in the front of your brain that thinks. So of course you're going to think horrible things, because there's nothing there to tell you it's not true.
Exactly. So where can people find you and your course and more about you?
My website, I pretty much, it's still under construction, but I think it looks fairly good now. So there's 7 characters in my website to find me. It's drruss.com, but it's dr-russ.com. So it's dr for doctor, and then hyphen, and then rus.com. And then the course has its own URL, which is theanxietymd.com. That may change as I move the Anxiety MD into my website, but currently that's where the course is at. It's called theanxietymd.com. And then my website has a link to the course too. So the best thing would be just go to my website if you want more information, www.dr-russ.com.
Perfect. And can you give us one last piece of advice before we let go?
Sure. Well, I think I touched on it a little bit. That book was called "Barking Up the Wrong Tree" by Eric Barker. This came to me. That's good. Which is an excellent, fantastic book. Yeah, like Eric Barker, I love his stuff. But I would say, there's a lot of stuff out there about mindfulness, and I think mindfulness is great in a lot of ways. But I would ask you, when you're anxious, just drop all other thoughts, whether or not am I going to get fired this week? Is my child okay? And just say, am I safe in this moment? In this very moment that I'm in, am I safe? And the answer is almost always yes. And if you're safe in this moment, you're safe. That's all we ever have. My daughter, who just had a baby 2 days ago, I'm a grandfather for the first time.
Congrats.
Yeah, she has a bit of anxiety. She doesn't have the same level that I do. But she says this has been the most helpful tip that I've given her, especially when she wakes up in the middle of the night, just asking herself, am I safe in this moment? And then there's some people are more driven by the statement. So you can also say, I am safe in this moment. And then just sit in that. And then put your hand over your alarm. That's where the problem is. The problem isn't in your head. The problem is this sense of alarm in your body. And that's what my mission is to go change the medical paradigm, change the paradigm that we're training people in now, which is talk therapy is helpful for anxiety, which is on some level. But if you don't deal with the body in talk therapy, like if you purely just do talk therapy, it's going to take you a long, long time, if ever, to recover from your anxiety. You really need to address that alarm, because that is the bottom of the iceberg. That's where you have to go if you want to improve your life and be able to move forward and get out of this constant need to go into the future, which is what anxiety is. So am I safe in this moment? Like right now, am I safe? You don't have to be safe tomorrow or the next day or whatever, but right now, am I safe? And then you've got some control and you've got some sense, and you develop a sense of who you are at that point if you can stay in the moment for long enough until your thoughts start trying to take you away again.
Dr. Russ Kennedy, thank you for being on the Careers by Jenn show. You've given us tons of stuff to think about.
Thanks, Jen. I really appreciated being here. I really do. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Careers by Jenn with Jenn Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.